The mere suggestion of applying sanctions to Ukraine, as Elon Musk apparently has just done, is not only madness but an outright act of treachery, probably even treason, to support America's enemies is an act of treason. It defies moral reasoning, strategic logic, and the lessons of history. The fact that the United States is even the fact that the authorities in the United States are even toying with such an idea, cutting off aid, demanding territorial concessions, or coercing Ukraine into a minerals deal, signals a disturbing shift in global order. This isn't diplomacy, this is blackmail, and this is treachery. Let's be clear, Russia will fail, not because of wishful thinking, but because Russia under Vladimir Putin is built on a foundation of corruption, of brutality, and historical amnesia. Like all authoritarian regimes, it overreaches. Like all imperialist projects, it will collapse under its own weight. The Soviet Union crumbled not because of military failures in Afghanistan, that didn't help, but because it was a system based on lies, sustained only by fear. And today's Russia is no different, except it's weaker, more fragile, more desperate. If Donald Trump believes that tying his political fortunes to Putin's train, to Putin's war machine, will lead him to glory, he's hitching a ride on the wrong vehicle, on the wrong tracks of history. History, if history is even to be written in this unfolding global chaos, history will judge him severely, if there is any history. Now we've got to remember the prophecies of St. Malachi that suggests that Pope Francis is the last pope before the Judgment Day. And Putin or Elon Musk or the gerbils. It's a very small move from gerbil to gerbil, isn't it? The gerbils and Musk's insistence that Ukraine must cede territory to Russia, coupled with the accusations that President Zelensky is ungrateful for American support, is a grotesque distortion of the situation. Zelensky is not a recipient of American charity. Ukraine isn't fighting a war on behalf of the free of itself. It's fighting a war on behalf of the free world, and every Ukrainian soldier resisting Russian aggression is holding the line, not just for Kyiv, but for Warsaw, for Berlin, for London, and ultimately for Washington. That's the nice C that Washington is hiding behind. Trump's position is not just misjudged, it's catastrophic for American credibility and Western security. It's there was a point a few months ago where a foolish boy went over to Ukraine and started making silly videos, but they weren't they were silly videos in this MAGA sense that Trump is now exposing. This fellow was called Nick Shirley, and I was horrified by the video that he made. And but actually, all he was doing was anticipating what Trump was going to say. Elon Musk's suggestion that the war could be ended by sanctioning Ukrainian oligarchs instead of Russian warlords is naive at best and dangerously misleading at worst. He claims to support Ukraine while simultaneously floating ideas that benefit Russia. His threats regarding Starlink's role in Ukraine's military infrastructure show the perils of allowing private individuals to wield influence over international conflicts. The world doesn't need an erratic billionaire playing diplomat while innocent civilians are being shelled. If the US were to impose sanctions on Ukraine while maintaining leniency towards Russia, it would be an unparalleled act of moral and strategic failure. It would reward aggression and punish resistance. It would signal to every dictator and warlord on the planet that invasions pay off and that the West is too cowardly to stand by its principles, or that the West wants to coattail tyranny. Ukraine's economy is already stretched to its limits. Its population is fighting a war of survival. The imposition of economic constraints on Kyiv would be the equivalent of handcuffing a drowning man. If Ukraine falls, the floodgates will open not just for Russian imperialism, but for every authoritarian regime watching to see how far they can push the free world. History offers clear lessons. Afghanistan defeated the Soviet Union not because of superior firepower, but because it resisted. The Taliban waited and waited and waited out the Americans and ultimately retook power. Vietnam endured and overcame overwhelming military might. The Ukrainians know this. Their fight is one of endurance, and the more Russia exhausts itself, the more cracks will appear in its fragile edifice. And Putin's war economy is in shambles. Inflation is rampant, military casualties are soaring, and discontent is simmering across Russia's ethnically diverse regions. The Chechens, the Dagestanis, and other minority groups drafted into the Russian military are cannon fodder for a war they don't believe in. The Russian Federation is not a stable state. It's a crumbling empire held together by repression, and it will not last. And, Russia actually now controls less of Ukraine than it did 3 years ago. It's not winning. It's losing. It's losing. And Ukraine is developing drones. 1.2 million drones last year, 4 million drones waiting to be deployed this year. This is and other technologies like the Hildak thing where you can put a little camera on your gun, and you can hide behind a fence and fire at the enemy. This is innovation. This is Ukrainian innovation. If Trump's America is willing to betray a country that is so clever, is willing to betray Ukraine, then Europe must act decisively. Europe must be clever. France and UK have pledged continued intelligence support despite Washington's wavering. Germany is rearming. Poland is preparing for the worst. The European Union must embrace its role as a defender of liberal democracy, not as a passive observer waiting for American approval. This isn't about belligerence. This is about common sense. This isn't about armchair army games. This is about actively pursuing what is right. Sanctioning Ukraine is not just a bad idea, it's an unforgivable betrayal. The world cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. We didn't stop Hitler when he annexed the Sudetenland. We didn't stop Russia when it took Crimea. We cannot hesitate now when the very principle of sovereignty and freedom is at stake. Ukraine doesn't need lectures on gratitude. It needs weapons. It needs funding. It needs support. And anything less is an endorsement of tyranny.